Going to take you straight to the French press review now. Dipty's here on set for us, and we're going to start with Germany. That attack in Ansbach on Monday, claimed by the Islamic State group now.
That's right, Stuart. It's a wave of attacks. It's one more attack in a wave of attacks that's weakening Angela Merkel politically. That's at least according to the front page of Le Figaro. That attack in Ansbach, as you mentioned, was carried out by a young Syrian asylum seeker, which is really drawing into some polarizing issues in Germany, issues like refugees, terrorism, security, so forth. Now, Merkel appears to be on the defensive. That's what Le Figaro says in this article. She's not wanting to create panic, but that's actually causing people to criticize her, especially the political parties in Germany. They blame her for the lack of security in Germany, obviously criticizing that decision last year to take in over 1 million asylum seekers. Le Figaro says she's facing a lot of criticism on the left for her perceived lack of action.
Of course, real criticism coming from the far right in Germany, who really stand to benefit from Merkel's growing unpopularity.
That's according to this article from L'Opinion. The right-wing publication underlines the contrast in political reactions in Germany facing this after this wave of attacks, saying it actually resembles more of the united front that we saw in Paris after the January and November attacks last year, and not what we're seeing, this sort of political squabbling that we've seen after the Nice attacks. Now, what's clear is that the attacks are swaying public opinion in Germany, especially in people's attitudes towards welcoming refugees in the country, which we know is as recently as a few months ago was quite positive, but now it's dramatically soured, and the far right could stand to benefit from this sort of sway in attitudes and opinions, especially with local elections to take place in September later.
Just like here in France, of course, Germany's also been affected by terrorist attacks, but also attacks carried out by psychologically unstable people. Lacroix says it's very difficult to distinguish between the two, really, doesn't it?
That's the insanity of terrorism. That's what Lacroix, the Catholic paper, says on its front page this morning. The attacker behind the Ansbach attack was known to have suicidal tendencies. The man behind the Munich shopping center shootout also, just like the Nice truck driver. But these attacks at the same time were claimed by the Islamic State group. And this highlights just how complicated the fight against terrorism is. Now, Lacroix has interviewed a lot of experts in this article who say that it's rare to see terrorists suffering from the clinical definition of psychiatry, but they do present psychiatric problems, and that's what recruiters for the IS group are banking on. That's what they're pouncing on. For instance, one psychiatrist says certain people experience their conversion to radical Islam as an identity crisis through which they identify themselves as the victims and then play out on this anger and resentment.
Now, you found a piece in Libération, haven't you, looking at the idea of the war in terror here in France?
Well, is France at war? That's what they're asking Libération on its front page this morning. The government is really grappling with the idea of the fight against terror being like any other war with weapons and combat. The paper reminds readers that the word war was actually first used after a very long time last November by François Hollande in his speech following the Paris attacks, when he told the nation that France was at war, presenting the country as a target of a terrorist army. Now, what's interesting to note is that after the Nice attacks, he dropped this vernacular and called it a terrorist attack, but didn't mention the word war. The reason, according to a political advisor interviewed by Libé, is that opting for the belligerent tone actually gives credibility to the enemy, in this case the Islamic State group, and gives them inspiration to carry out more attacks. Now, what's clear is that France is at war on another front, and that's the front in Iraq and Syria. I want to show you this cartoon from Willem in Libération. You see a couple of civilians seeing planes and saying, oh, there are bomber planes on the horizon. That must mean there's been another attack in France. And it really equates the frequency of airstrikes in Iraq and Syria with the frequency of attacks in France.
Let's cheer things up a little bit, shall we? End on something a little bit lighter in the papers. Le Parisien, they're looking at where France's politicians are going to be spending their cherished summer holidays. I think this piece comes around every year. Everyone wants to know where everyone's going, don't they?
It does come around every year, but I think this year it's maybe got more significance because it's the last summer vacation before the presidential elections next year. Now, let's start with Nicolas Sarkozy, who'll be staying at a luxury holiday spot in Corsica, the island of Corsica. And then he'll be spending some time at his wife Carla Bruni's family villa in Cap Negro. That's something he does every year. Now, presidential candidate on the right, Alain Juppé, is actually going to mix a bit of pleasure with politics. He's heading on a 10-day trip to New Caledonia and French Polynesia, no doubt to curry favor and drum up some support there from the French territory. Now, François Hollande will not be taking a prolonged break. That's what some sources are saying. He wants to show the country that he's surveying it even during the sleepy holiday month of August.
Okay, perhaps he'll get a long holiday next year, or perhaps not. You never know. Still got those elections to come next spring here in France. Thank you very much, Tip Tip with the French papers here on France 24. Do